How far would you go to live forever? Would you bankrupt a kingdom, execute your friends, or even make deals with the devil himself? Henry VIII did all this and more. The king who thought he could rewrite the rules of life and death, who turned his court into a den of alchemists and witch doctors, even as his 400 pounds of festering flesh laid on the bed, he was still screaming at priests to pray harder, paying alchemists to turn mercury into miracles. The man who beheaded 2 wives and broke the Catholic Church now had one enemy he couldn't intimidate, couldn't execute, couldn't escape. This is what happens when absolute power meets the one force that doesn't bow to kings. What if I told you that the man who ruled by fear died in fear? This isn't just the story of how a king died, it's the story of how he tried everything not to. Why did the most powerful man in England fear death more than anyone else? He wasn't a common man. He wasn't supposed to die like one. This was a king who saw himself as God's chosen, ordained and invincible. His word created laws. His decisions split the church. He tore England from the Pope's grip, not just for love, but for control. Control over life, over legacy. And maybe, just maybe, over death itself. So when his body began to rot from the inside, he refused to believe it. How could a man with this much power be powerless to his own decay? He tried everything. Dozens of surgeons, potions imported from the East, monks praying around the clock, relics held to his skin, even schemes to rewrite theology in his favor. He thought he could outmaneuver death, with power, with religion, with medicine, with manipulation, but every move he made only brought it closer, because death doesn't kneel to crowns. It waits, and when it comes, it takes. So the question is, how far did Henry go before death finally said enough? Before he was England's lion, he was a second son, a shadow behind Prince Arthur's golden glow. Arthur was the one groomed for greatness. Henry, he was the spare, meant for the church, not the crown. But then, Arthur died, suddenly, mysteriously, at just 15, and the boy no one expected to rule became heir to a kingdom. From that moment, death wasn't just a word. It was a presence, hovering behind every royal curtain, every coughing fit, every cold night. But it wasn't just loss that haunted young Henry. It was what the church told him came after. Eternal judgment, hellfire, a God who watched and weighed and punished. From the cradle he was taught to fear sin more than pain. That sickness might be a test, or a punishment. That weakness wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It meant God had turned his face from you. So when Henry inherited the crown, he didn't just inherit power, he inherited dread, dread of failure, dread of dying without a legacy, dread of being forgotten. He didn't fear death because it meant pain. He feared death because it meant silence, oblivion, no throne, no heirs, no songs sung in his name. If you were raised to believe God chose you to rule, how would you react to illness, as weakness or as betrayal? To Henry, even the smallest wound was an omen. Even a cough could whisper treason. And so, from the very beginning, he made a vow in his heart he would not go quietly. Not like Arthur, not like the rest. As Henry grew into his crown, his obsession with control grew with him. This wasn't just about ruling England. This was about ruling fate, ruling memory, ruling even the afterlife. He didn't just want power, he wanted protection from sickness, from time, from the slow fade of history, so he seized control wherever he could, starting with the church. Yes, he split from Rome to marry Anne Boleyn, but that was only the surface. What Henry really wanted was to command the gates of heaven. By forming the Church of England, he didn't just crown himself head of state, he crowned himself head of souls. Now sin could be redefined. Now salvation could be purchased, written, edited. Now no foreign pope could damn him. But behind the political maneuvering was terror. He feared purgatory, that grey, burning waiting room of souls. He feared the idea of spiritual debt, being tallied after his last breath. So he tried to buy his way out. He paid for monks to pray endlessly for him. He funded chapels, shrines and altars, not for the living, but for his own soul's security. He built chantries where priests would sing masses, day and night, just to shave off his time in purgatory. And then, the tomb. Even while alive, he planned his burial like a second coronation, a massive marble monument, bronze effigies of himself kneeling in eternal prayer, angels, columns, inscriptions of power. He ordered it built decades before his death, because to Henry, death wasn't the end, it was the last battle, and he wanted to win it on his terms. He didn't just want to defeat France, he wanted to defeat oblivion. He didn't want to be judged, he wanted to be remembered, worshipped, immortal. But for all his power, all his wealth, and all the illusions of control he built around himself, there was one thing he couldn't silence, his own body. It was turning on him, and death was no longer a shadow in the distance. It was crawling closer, from within, as his body failed, legs ulcerated, flesh breaking down, every breath a labor. Henry turned his gaze to the one thing he still believed he could control, his ending. He became obsessed with his will, not just the legal parchment, but the legend it would leave behind. He dictated every detail, how he would be buried, where, what he would wear, what would be carved, who would mourn, and how deeply. He ordered a tomb fit not for a man, but for a god, gold-plated angels, roaring lions at his feet, massive brass effigies kneeling in eternal adoration, a canopy of black marble so vast it could be seen as a monument to power and to fear. He demanded a funeral procession, stretching 1.5 miles, nobles in black, drums of mourning, a coffin covered in cloth of gold, dragged through London like a relic of the divine. At Windsor, he wanted choirs, masses sung daily, forever. He believed that voices raised in prayer could drown out judgment itself. This wasn't mourning, it was theatre, an afterlife scripted like a royal decree. But you can't choreograph your death, and no amount of pageantry can drown the smell of a rotting king. The tomb was never finished, the gold never delivered, the angels never cast, even the daily prayers eventually faded. His body, sealed in lead, burst open from within. The blood leaked out, the truth bled through. In the end, all that remained was flesh, rot, and silence. He tried to write himself into eternity, but even kings run out of ink. January 28, 1547, the sun rose on England, and the king, once Europe's most feared man, was gasping for air in the dark. He died in agony. No glory, no final words worthy of scripture, just pain. His ulcerated leg had turned black, the stench filled the royal chambers. His body swelled, leaking fluids his physicians couldn't name or stop. They say no priest dared to give him last rites at first, because no one wanted to be near his bed. The rot had already won. He was 55, but looked like a corpse days before he actually became one. And then he was gone, a death unfit for a stable boy, let alone a king who thought he could bargain with God. But even in death, his body refused to behave. Sealed in a lead-lined coffin, he was transported to Windsor. The trip was long, and the king was decomposing. Somewhere along the way, gases built up inside the coffin, and it burst. The lid cracked, the rot seeped out, and according to a chronicler of the time, dogs found the puddle that leaked from the king and licked his blood. Whispers spread quickly. The dogs licked the blood of Ahab, a reference from the Bible, the wicked king of Israel, who defied God and whose death was seen as divine justice. Henry, once head of the Church of England, was now being compared not to saints, but to cursed kings. And that elaborate tomb, still incomplete, he was buried in a vault beside Jane Seymour, in a chapel that wasn't finished either. No angels, no lions, no monument, just stone, dirt, and silence, even in death. Henry couldn't command respect from the very earth. His body bloated, ruptured, forgotten by the living, and remembered not as a god among men, but as a man who thought he was one. In the end, the man who tried to script his immortality was buried in a vault. Most people walk over without noticing. No angels, no gold canopy, no mournful choirs echoing through the centuries, just stone, plain, forgotten, shared with another king, Charles I, who was executed by his own people. So much for eternity. The Church of England? It changed. Reformation swept on with or without him. New monarchs rewrote the rules he fought so hard to craft. His theology reshaped, his authority diluted. His beloved son Edward, the one he saw as his divine heir, died at 15, no legacy there. Mary ruled. Then Elizabeth, the daughter he once tried to disinherit. She reigned longer than him, stronger than him, and left a legacy that history treasures far more. And Henry? His name became a caricature. The fat king with 6 wives, the tyrant, the glutton, the man who killed for love, but died unloved. People remember him, yes, but not for the reasons he prayed they would. He tried to cheat death, with power, with wives, with walls of gold, with rewritten prayers. But in the end, death came as it always does, quiet, certain, and unimpressed. Henry VIII spent his life building monuments to immortality, but today we remember him not for his triumphs, but for his terror. That swollen, stinking corpse in Windsor Chapel is the real monument, not to power, to panic. There's a reason his story chills us centuries later, because we all somehow play Henry's game now, just with different pieces. We are afraid of being forgotten, afraid that when the curtain falls, no one will remember our name, or worse, they'll remember it wrong. History's most cruel joke is that the rulers who cling hardest to control, the Stalins, the Neros, the Henrys, are the ones whose deaths become cautionary tales. The more desperately they try to etch their names in stone, the more the universe laughs and lets erosion do its work. History isn't just about the dead. It's a mirror. And right now, Henry's story is asking you something. What will you do with your time before the clock runs out? If you want to keep unraveling more episodes on the fears that made kings tremble or the lies that built empires, then join us. Subscribe. Walk deeper into the shadows with me. because this is just the first page.